Hello, this is your Gaza War sit rep day 151. Uh, no end in sight, as I always say. Um, and there's no deep dive today. We're going to go and report on the fronts, but this is addressed to a specific group of us. I'd say I don't want to I don't want to disclude myself from this group, but it's for people who believed once or continue to believe that at some limit of Israeli action, at some limit set by the United States will call Israel off. And there are good reasons for having believed this. There is historical precedent. This is what has happened every single Gaza war until now 2014, 2021, 2008 9, 2006. All of these times, there were weeks and weeks of war. And then at some point, the US basically imposed on Israel that they had to stop. And the costs were becoming high for Israel. The costs were becoming high for the United States. And so they made Israel stop, and Israel stopped. And even more so, this was true in previous big wars, conventional wars of state on state, when Israel fought Egypt in 1973 and 1967 and when they invaded Lebanon in 1982. All of these had ceasefires imposed from the outside, in those cases because of Soviet pressure as well. This time is different. This time is different. 2023, 24 is different. Israel is willing to absorb tremendous costs. The United States is willing to absorb tremendous costs, the loss of all of their soft power, the loss of all of their esteem in the world, the loss of their rules-based order, the humiliation before the international courts, the loss of all credibility of their major media. All of this has been accepted as the price of committing this genocide, which transcends all other values, it seems, that are held by Israel, the US, Canada, France, Germany, England. So there's some discussion, and an ongoing discussion, of what kind of world that means we live in. And maybe we've lived in such a world all along, or maybe there are certain changes that are happening right now. But aside from the discussion of the kind of world we live in, that we will only reveal itself long term, there are strategic implications for what happens and how this war unfolds. And this war will not unfold. This war will not conclude with the US calling Israel off. I think it's safe to say that's not how this war is going to end. It's not going to end the way that all of the previous rounds of Gaza war have ended, because there has been some kind of qualitative change in strategy, change in acceptable costs and losses that Israel has decided they're willing to accept, and that the US is willing to follow. So while we cannot know exactly how many casualties Israel has taken, we have things happening that we cannot expect. The Zaytun, now we can start talking about the fronts, okay? And we'll start with Gaza. The Battle of Zaytun has been going on, and I apologize for my not being here for a few days. It's been a complicated week, and it's not Gaza related, so I'm not going to get into any of it. But it's been 5 days since my previous sit rep, and the Battle of Zaytun has been going on since before. I reported on it in that sit rep and the sit reps before, and it's still going on. The Israelis are still losing soldiers in the Zaytun neighborhood of North Gaza. The Mujahideen brigades report sniping a soldier. Omar al-Qasim forces report shelling army positions in Zaytun, targeting army vehicles. And also in Khan Yunis, there are battles. The Iraq front is back online. They have targeted the power station at Haifa with drones. So, and that was yesterday, that was today and yesterday. So the Iraqi resistance is back in the fight. Whatever, I don't know. We don't know exactly why they took some time out. I suspect it was because of ongoing negotiations about the US withdrawal from Iraq. And probably the US was dangling leaving and making conditions that attacks not continue. And probably the US didn't leave. And the Iraqi resistance was convinced that they were just dangling this in bad faith, the way they've been doing everything in bad faith. And so attacks have resumed. And I think they will probably continue. Yemen has been, they announced today that the armed forces carried out what they call a qualitative military operation targeting 2 American warships in the Red Sea. So Yemen is continuing their operations in the Red Sea. Hezbollah has announced in Lebanon attacks on settlements, Israeli soldiers, bases, Kiryat Shmona. So there are several attacks by Hezbollah targeting infantry forces in Wazani. You probably have heard that Israel has also bombed deeper into Lebanon than they have so far in this war. You may have seen Al-Qassam with new videos hitting tanks in the outskirts of Gaza City again. So the battles in Gaza and in Gaza City and in Khan Yunis continue. Hezbollah front is open. Iraq front is open again. And Yemen. So all of these fronts have been extremely active, and they have been reaching the Iraq. The Iraq drones have reached farther than they have so far. They're attacking Haifa. I think they've hit Haifa before once, but yeah, Haifa is one of the important ports, a very important city in Israel. So I think I'm going to try to tally up quantitatively the amount of armor and soldiers that Israel has lost in the Battle of Zaytun based on these reports that we have, but I can't do that today. I will try to do it. We'll try to do it in the coming days. I want to tell you about. Okay, let me tell you again. We'll go over. I think you've probably seen a lot of this, but the Israelis, in addition to their airstrikes and the new qualitative new innovation of systematically attacking hospital after hospital to destroy the hospital infrastructure of an area that of Gaza. This is, I think, an innovation. So the same way we've seen military innovations from the resistance in terms of their anti-tank tactics, the tunnels. So the Israelis have also made innovations. They've made innovations of assassinating civilians, patients in a hospital while dressing up as medical personnel. They've made innovations in terms of dismantling hospitals from aerial and combined arms warfare against hospitals and medical personnel. So that's an innovation. And then now they've also got the innovation of using starvation as a weapon in the first instance, and grassroots protests. So the grassroots protests, you've probably seen civilians. You've probably seen Israeli civilians lined up protesting at at the various entry points for humanitarian aid, blocking aid and announcing the achievement that we blocked aid again today. We're starving Gaza again today. So they're blocking humanitarian aid at a grassroots level with support from the army. So they have a kind of a military civilian coordination all across the political spectrum. So there's innovations there. And then you probably heard of the Flower Massacre. This, I think, took place just as I was doing the last sit rep, or just after it. And there have been two. There have been two massacres in North Gaza where they are starving people deliberately, on record, planned starvation, and then they draw people to humanitarian aid, set up snipers and tanks, and shell them and shoot them, assassinate them, hundreds at a time. So that's also an innovation. So that I think is going to be one of the things that they go for now, to try to, as they use starvation as a weapon, they'll also attack people as they try to get aid. So that has two benefits. It also makes people scared to try to feed themselves, and then it also, some of you've probably seen the footage, the aerial footage. You can see in the aerial footage the Zionist fantasy come true of like this kind of control from the air, and the people are like little dots moving around, and then you disperse them by shooting them, and it's this kind of godlike feeling that it generates for people watching, if they are genocidally inclined, which clearly is a large number of people in Israel and their supporters that are deriving some kind of joy out of watching these horrors happen. So innovation on the Israeli side, and then there's also been a new flavors, new genres of atrocity videos, trophy videos. There's a lot more Israeli soldiers posing with lingerie that they've captured from people's houses that they've raided. Maybe the residents are dead and they're posing with the dead women's lingerie. They're also posing, playing with children's toys, in children's cribs, in full military gear, playing with children's toys that they've again probably killed. So these are innovations on the Israeli side. So we have two sets of parallel military innovations to report there. I also want, circling back, as they say, to the discussion in the beginning, because in between my last two sit reps, between last sit rep and now, there's been another round of ceasefire theater, and I think we should really put this to rest. The ceasefire theater with Joe Biden licking ice cream and saying we're going to have a ceasefire by Monday. Well, that was all theatrics. There was never going to be a ceasefire by Monday, because the offer that they gave the Palestinian resistance was worse than the one that Palestinian resistance had rejected. And again, we've gone over this in these sit reps many times, but the baseline for the resistance, and there is absolutely no reason for the resistance to accept anything less than this, which is the prisoners for the prisoners. So the 10,000 Palestinian prisoners, including 7,000 that Israel has captured since October 7th. Many children, many women being tortured, being raped, many other crimes committed against these prisoners, these Palestinian prisoners. All of those prisoners be released in exchange for the Israeli prisoners. The Israeli prisoners, there was a speech since last sit rep by Abu Ubaidah, the spokesperson for the Qassam brigades, Hamas's armed wing, and Abu Ubaidah said something like 70 Israeli prisoners have now been killed, Abu Ubaidah claims, deliberately by Israeli attacks. So Israel is trying to, this is another point, which is that Israel is trying to kill all of the prisoners. So the so-called Hannibal doctrine that we've talked about before on these sit reps, the idea that Israel would rather kill Israelis who get captured or who might get captured rather than having to trade Palestinian prisoners for Israeli prisoners. That's a doctrine that's been in place for a while. They denied it. They said they'd repealed it, but then on October 7th itself, hundreds of Israelis were killed by the Israeli armed forces, precisely in what was described by one Israeli general as a mass Hannibal event. So they're killing civilians as Hannibal, under the Hannibal doctrine. They're killing prisoners now all over Gaza, hunting them down with their intelligence that they have and killing them all over Gaza. And this is another one of those costs that they appear to be willing to bear, which may have long-term, I suspect will have long-term effects on their society. But in the meantime, in the short term, they're taking these hits, killing their own prisoners so that they can continue killing Palestinians. So the highest goal is to kill Palestinians. There are no higher goals than that, starving them, killing them. That is what Israeli society has organized itself around, and US society increasingly. So we have that ceasefire theatrics, another round of them. And I think what we can learn from this, because rather than falling for this over and over again, the baseline. So the baseline is the prisoners for the prisoners, the aggression stops, and the starvation stops. And Israel says, we'll give us all the prisoners back, and then we'll stop bombing you for a while, and we'll continue to starve you, and then we'll resume bombing you once we have all our prisoners back. And there's just no reason to accept that. If they're going to starve you and bomb you anyway, why stop fighting back? Why stop fighting the occupation? And why give prisoners back when they're capturing more and more Palestinian prisoners and torturing them and mistreating them? And Hamas officials, as well as the political officials like Osama Hamdan, he said, we won't allow the negotiation to remain open-ended while the aggression against our people continues. We're not going to negotiate under conditions of starvation. They're asking Palestinians to negotiate their starvation, and they're not willing to do that. There's no reason for them to do that. I did a sit rep on airdrops and how useless they are and how vile they are. You can go back to that one on airdrops. There's nothing more to say except that airdrops have become a thing that they're all doing now. And again, according to their genocidal logic, airdrops make less sense than trucks. Why, if the whole point is we need to starve the bad people, and Israel wants to starve them, and we do what Israel wants, why airdrop? Unless Israel has allowed you to airdrop, in which case Israel is allowing it because they know it's useless. So what can we learn then from the ceasefire? I think we can learn from the ceasefire negotiations that this round is different, that 23-24 is different, and that the US is not going to be the ones who call this off. And Israel is going to have to decide to stop this based entirely on a calculation that the losses are too high to their soldiers, to their military, and to their society and their economy based on the activities of the resistance. And that's the only way this is going to end. And the Israelis are going to continue this genocide until that happens. And it's the Americans are going, whatever administration, whether the American administration that's presently in office loses an election or wins an election, US support for Israel is going to continue and it's an unconditional support for Israel is going to continue, and the same goes for Canada, and the same goes for Germany and France and England. So that is I think what we can learn, like I said, from the latest round of up and down of ceasefire chatter. And so let's not fall for that again. I imagine there will be more rounds of this happening. Is there anything else that I can talk to you about? You may have, for those of you who don't know, George Galloway is one of the few politicians in England that has been pretty solidly anti-occupation, anti-apartheid, anti-genocide. He's got his own talk show. I've been on it a couple of times. I think maybe just once, called The Mother of All Talk Shows. And he gave a fantastic interview to Sky News just after getting elected in a neighborhood in, I think, London. So check that out. Check out George Galloway. And it's going to be interesting to see what he does in Parliament. I don't know whether they're going to. I'm sure they're thinking of how they can stop having elections or change the rules so that he isn't allowed to speak, and all of the rules of Parliament are going to have to come into question now that George Galloway is back in there. But so that that's an interesting little moment for the West that Galloway got reelected, and it's probably because of Gaza and his position on Gaza. That's I think there was, I want to see if there are any other items that we need to talk about. Two massacres, two flower massacres. I mean, airstrikes, we've probably said before, have continued. I think, there was an interesting, they're trying to take, certain countries are trying to take Western countries to court, to the ICJ, for being accessories to genocide. That's interesting. I wonder whether people have suggested that there should be a media trial. There was a media trial in Rwanda. The International Court, the International Criminal Tribunal on Rwanda, the ICTR, did have a media component where they tried media, but that was, remember, the ICTR is more like the ICC, the International Criminal Court, than it was like the ICJ. Yeah, it was Nicaragua submitting an ICJ application against Germany alleging violations because of their support to Israel, discontinuing aid to UNRWA. I guess the European Union announced that they're not gonna reinstate funding to UNRWA, which also just is vile. The whole thing, everything that happened with UNRWA, I can only think of the word vile. Reinstating it is also like, why did you cut it in the first place? But the whole thing is vile. There have been big demonstrations against Netanyahu also in Israel, and there was a resignation. Oh yeah, that I wanted to mention. The guy, you probably have seen this, but the Israeli spokesman who went under Shifa Hospital and pointed to this and that as evidence, very, very almost satirical videos that he made, or press conferences or whatever that he was making. He resigned, and it's unclear. We don't know why he resigned, but it's got to be somewhat of an interesting thing that he resigned. I guess yesterday or the day before. Some of the most ridiculous propaganda that Israel made was made, but with him as the spokesman. So, there been more trophy videos of mistreating prisoners by Israel, more kidnappings, and that contradiction between the proud trophy videos posing with lingerie or posing with children's toys, those are always ignored, right? Those are completely ignored by the Western allies. Like, you don't, Justin Trudeau or whoever won't defend posing Israeli soldiers posing with lingerie or posing with dead children's toys. He just pretends that those things aren't happening. Um, and then when there's a massacre of starving people, they'll just say, "Oh, we don't know what happened. It was chaos. It was reported as chaos. It was reported as trampling, but it was absolutely a massacre, a deliberate massacre of civilians, starving civilians." So, in addition to Abu Ubaida's speech, there's also Abu Hamza made a speech, the spokesperson for the Palestinian Islamic Jihad's armed wing, Soraya al-Quds. And one thing that Abu Hamza said that I think is worth noting is that he said, we can continue the fight for as long as it goes. And I think that was probably, maybe that's bluster, but I think that was probably a question that people had. You know, can these groups go on in the face of everything that's happening? It was on Saturday. Abu Hamza, I'll just tell you this. Maybe this will March 2nd. I'll just say a few words about it. The main point of Abu Ubaida's speech, as I mentioned, was to say that many Israeli prisoners have been killed by Israel. And Abu Ubaida, before I mention Abu Hamza, Abu Ubaida said something pretty amazing. Abu Ubaida said, in case Israel thinks that killing its own prisoners is going to change our demands, he basically said the price that we extract from even 5 or 10 prisoners who remain will be the same as if we had, the 200 or 150 that we had at the beginning. So he's saying whether we trade all 150 or 130 or however many are alive now after Israel killed so many of them for the 10,000 or it was going to be 3,000, but Israel arrested 7,000 more, or we trade 5 for those 10,000, we still are getting all of our prisoners back for the Israeli prisoners that we have. That's going to be the deal. So however many you capture now, however many Palestinians you capture, however many Israelis you kill, Israel will still have to trade all of the Palestinian prisoners for all of the Israeli prisoners. The numbers are not, changing the numbers this way or that is not going to change the nature of the all for all deal that the resistance is willing to fight for. So there, Abu Hamza says he wants the month of Ramadan, who's coming up, to be a day of global mobilization on all fields. He says, go out light or heavy to attack the enemy. If you're in the West Bank and Al-Quds, the united body of the nation will do the impossible. And he says something specifically. He says, we can go. Our message to the enemy and leader of the herd, Netanyahu, is that the issue of the next day in Gaza is determined by none other than the Palestinian resistance. You may have heard all these different plans for the day after that Netanyahu has been putting out. So Abu Hamza had that to say. He says, we say to our people, you're the symbol of dignity, pride, and the crowns of our heads, and we shall not relinquish your rights, no matter how much we share the pain and wounds with you. We are able to continue the battle, no matter how long it lasts. He also said to the people, the resistance shares with you all the circumstances you're experiencing, and we will later reveal the scenes of this battle and the protection of the fighters in the alleys of danger and the fields of martyrdom. So they can't even reveal everything that they're doing until after the war. So the war will end one day, and it's hard to believe from where we're sitting now, but the war is going to end one day, and then we will find out all of the things that were done that we don't know now. While I'm at it, I mentioned Osama Hamdan, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad spokesman. Mohammed Al-Hajj Musa said to Palestine today, this is about the ceasefire business. The occupation was not serious regarding negotiations. The resistance confirms there will be no deal before its withdrawal from Gaza, lifting the siege and reconstruction. And the Palestinian resistance factions are operating from the assumption, and you guys can say what you think in the comments, whether you think this is right. I think it's certainly a plausible, believable assumption, but they basically are under the assumption that part of the reason Israel is continuing so hard and willing to accept, as I said, such high costs in prestige, economic losses, military losses, armor, equipment, soldiers. They're willing to accept such high costs because they're afraid that their society will fall apart when the war is over. And Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad spokesperson said this. He said, after the war in Gaza ends, things in the Israeli entity will explode. So that is their belief. Okay, so that is, I think I'll stop there for tonight. A short one tonight. No historical deep dives, but a lot to catch up on. I will try to come back with an analysis of the Battle of Zaytun. The Israelis have kind of reconfigured around Zaytun, but I think there is still some fighting. If I see it calming down, I'll try to do a tally. I may do a tally anyway. And I'll stop there. The main points, I think, to extract from this moment are: one, massacres of starving people are going to be a new thing that Israelis are doing. Israelis are posting new levels of depravity in terms of pictures and trophy photos, which are always ignored systematically by their Western allies. While they defend some crimes, but they don't defend these kinds of crimes. And three, the ceasefire. The whole structure of analysis that says, based on historical precedents, that the war goes a certain level, the Israelis go too far, and the Americans call them back and tell them to stop. I think that is a framework that no longer applies, and whatever the nature, as we try to figure out the nature of the world that we're living in now, we have to discard the idea that we're still living in the world where the US calls Israel off after a time of once the costs become too high. The costs have been very high, and the US is not calling Israel off. So I don't think there will be any calling Israel off. Israel is going to have to make the decision on their own when the costs to Israel become prohibitive from their own perspective. And their own perspective has also changed, as we have seen through the expansion without any obvious limit in sight of the Hannibal doctrine, the extension to civilians, the extension to prisoners and hostages that are already captured. So there's a lot to watch. There will be a lot to report on in the coming days and weeks. I will try to get back to this tomorrow, but there are going to be a few more there are going to be a few more delays in the coming days. So don't be alarmed if there isn't one in the next few days, or I may get to one tomorrow, but then there might be a delay for a few days. So don't be alarmed. Go get your content. Go to the East as a podcast. There's a Tanky Therapy there waiting for you. I wasn't able to be there, but go there. Go to Electronic Intifada. They've got their Wednesday live stream. We'll tide you over with plenty of material. And I will be back in hopefully tomorrow or in a few days. Hang in there, and please like and subscribe and stuff like that, and hang in there. There may not be an end in sight, but there will be an end to this war.